This is the VOA Special English Development Report. Mobile phones have revolutionized the way people connect, not only with family and friends, but also business services. A good example: services that let people use their phones to send and receive money. Two companies, Safaricom and Vodafone, launched the M-Pesa mobile money service in Kenya in 2007. Pesa means money in Swahili. The service operates much like a savings bank, which is important because plenty of Kenyans do not have bank accounts. Most of the early users were young men who worked in cities and wanted to send money home to rural areas. Now, customers can also use their M-Pesa accounts to pay bills, make purchases, or pay for services like taxis. Users pay a small amount for each transaction. Stephen Mbagua has a farm a half-hour's drive from the capital. He uses M-Pesa to receive money from his son and to pay bills. He says, "I used to go to Nairobi or to any bank to pay my bill, but now I don't go to Nairobi, I just pay my bill from here." Some businesses use the service to pay their employees. All across Kenya, there are stores and automated teller machines where M-Pesa users can add and withdraw money from their accounts. People can also transfer money to other mobile phone users, even those without an M-Pesa account. The other person receives a text message with a code to take to the local M-Pesa agent to get the money. All this pleases 22-year-old Philister Omari. She says, "It's very fast. The M-Pesa, they're available everywhere. So once you are going somewhere, you can drop, get some cash, and proceed." M-Pesa is improving economic conditions for many Kenyan families. British-based Vodafone has also teamed with local companies to offer the service in Uganda and Afghanistan. Safaricom says nearly 8 million people in Kenya now use M-Pesa. That number is expected to grow as more people use mobile phones. A recent report predicted that the number of mobile phone accounts worldwide will reach almost 4.5 billion this year. That is 12% more than last year and equal to 2/3 of the world's population. The report was from the European Information Technology Observatory. The group says the strongest growth in mobile phone use now comes from newly industrialized and developing countries. And that's the VOA Special English Development Report. This is the VOA Special English Development Report. A new report says the illegal killing of rhinos for their horns is increasing in Africa and Asia. Rhinoceros poachers are killing an estimated 2 to 3 of the rare animals each week. Experts say demand in Asia, especially Vietnam and China, currently drives most trade in rhino horns from southern Africa. The horns are often used to make traditional medicines or handles for dagger knives. The report is from the International Union for the Conservation of Nature and an organization known as Traffic. Most African rhino poaching is in Zimbabwe and South Africa. experts found that 210 rhinos were illegally killed in South Africa in the last 3 years. The estimate for Zimbabwe is 235. The situation threatens gains made in its rhino populations in the 1990s. In the last 2 years, only 6 people were found guilty of poaching charges out of 41 arrested. In 2001, 68% of African rhino horns entering illegal trade were recovered. 8 years later, 9 out of 10 rhino horns were heading to Asian markets without interference. The report says poaching and illegal horn trade has increased in South Africa, even with new measures against it. Adding to the problem, poachers today are more skilled at killing rhinos, and not only with guns. They also use quieter methods like drugs, poison, and crossbows. An international agreement on protecting endangered animals and plants provides for sport hunting of white rhinos in Africa. But the horns often enter illegal markets. Not all the news is bad, however. The report notes that rhino populations are increasing in some areas. These include both white rhinos and black rhinos in the wild in Africa. Africa had an estimated 17,000 white rhinos and 4,000 black rhinos as of 2 years ago. Current estimates for Asia are around 3,000 rhinos. But even with poaching, growth is reported in some areas of India and Nepal. Wildlife activists are urging governments to do more to fight rhino poaching. The report was presented to the organization known as CITES. CITES is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. The next conference of countries that are parties to the agreement is in March in Doha, Qatar. And that's the VOA Special English Development Report.
This is the VOA Special English Development Report. Scientists continue to seek better weapons against malaria. Each year, the number of cases is in the hundreds of millions worldwide. About 1 million people die, most of them in Africa. Economic losses from the disease amount to an estimated 1% of the African economy each year. George Demopoulos is an associate professor at the Johns Hopkins Malaria Research Institute in Baltimore, Maryland. He says 42% of the Earth's population live in areas where malaria-transmitting mosquitoes exist. All of these people are at risk of being infected with malaria. He says the sad thing is that the majority of people who are killed by malaria are children. This is because their immune systems are not strong enough to fight the infection. Malaria is caused by a parasite called Plasmodium. The organism is injected into people through the bite of infected mosquitoes. Malaria can be treated, but in many areas, the parasites have become resistant to different drugs. George Demopoulos and his team are studying ways to make mosquitoes resist infection by the parasite. There are hundreds of kinds of mosquitoes in the world. Most do not spread malaria. Some have immune systems that kill Plasmodium. He says researchers are interested in the immune reactions that are responsible for killing the malaria parasite. The researchers have developed a way to make genetic changes in the 3 mosquito species known to spread malaria. The changes cause their systems to attack the parasite, blocking its development. Other researchers are working on ways to spread these genetically modified insects among mosquito populations. Professor Demopoulos says there is still a long way to go, but current malaria research is highly promising. A new vaccine is in final testing. So far, it has proven effective at preventing the disease in half of those vaccinated, which is more than ever before. And at the Malaria Institute at Macha in Zambia, researchers are developing an easier way to identify malaria. The test uses saliva instead of blood to diagnose the infection. Current efforts in malaria control are mainly based on the use of insecticide sprays and treated bed nets. But George Demopoulos says malaria needs to be attacked with drugs, vaccines, and bed nets, and with whatever researchers can develop. And that's the VOA Special English Development Report.
This is the VOA Special English Development Report. World No Tobacco Day is celebrated each year on May 31st. The observance is meant to bring attention to the growing use of tobacco and its deadly effects. The World Health Assembly established the event in 1987. This year, special attention is being given to the harmful effects of tobacco marketing to women and girls. The World Health Organization says tobacco kills nearly 5.5 million people a year, another victim every 6 seconds. Tobacco use is a top cause of deaths worldwide. 1 billion people smoke. More than 80% of tobacco users live in low and middle-income countries. The WHO says the tobacco industry has increasingly directed its marketing campaigns at women and girls. Women currently represent about 20% of smokers, but tobacco use among girls is increasing. Data collected from 151 countries show that about 7% of young girls now smoke. That compares with 12% of boys. In some countries, however, the rates are almost equal. Almost 170 countries have signed a treaty called the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. The WHO is calling on those governments to ban tobacco advertising to the fullest extent possible and to do more to protect women. The agreement seeks to reduce the demand and supply of tobacco products. This year marks the 5th anniversary since the treaty went into effect. 80% of the signers have banned the sale of tobacco products to young people. 70% have required health warnings on tobacco products. The WHO estimates that tobacco use caused 100 million deaths in the 20th century. If current rates continue, that number could reach 1 billion in this century. Events were held in a number of countries to mark World No Tobacco Day. Many of the events were aimed at persuading people, especially the young, not to start smoking. Others aimed to educate people about the many health benefits of quitting. And that's the VOA Special English Development Report. We have a link to a list of activities for World No Tobacco Day on our website, voaspecialenglish.com. And while you're there, tell us if you have been able to quit smoking and what advice you might have for others. You can also post comments on Facebook at VOA Learning English.
This is the VOA Special English Development Report. Diarrhea kills 1.5 million children each year. 1 in 5 child deaths worldwide. The only disease that kills more children under age 5 is pneumonia. Experts say diarrhea causes more child deaths than AIDS, malaria, and measles combined. New findings show it also kills more than 1 million adolescents and elderly people every year. Therese Dooley is a senior advisor at UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund. She says in addition to the deaths, there are about 2.5 billion cases of diarrhea among children every year. But a new report says 60% of those in developing countries do not get the recommended treatment. The report, appearing in the Lancet Medical Journal, is from UNICEF and the World Health Organization. It includes a 7-point plan for countries to use to prevent and treat diarrhea. The condition causes fluid loss and reduces the body's supply of zinc. This mineral is needed for normal growth and development. For the past 5 years, UNICEF and the WHO have recommended zinc supplements to treat diarrhea. They also recommend fluid replacement solutions made from what are called low osmolarity oral rehydration salts. Yet zinc supplements remain largely unavailable in the developing world. And the fluid replacement solutions can also be difficult to find. A leading cause of diarrhea in children is the rotavirus. Public health officials are now advised to include the rotavirus vaccine in all national immunization programs. But the vaccine is still not available in many developing countries. The report says new ways to expand the use of treatments are now being developed. Proposals include, for example, supplying treatment kits through community health workers or special campaigns. Experts say children with diarrhea should continue to eat and babies should continue to breastfeed. To help prevent diarrhea, the report suggests that children receive both the rotavirus and measles vaccines. It also calls for improving supplies of clean water in developing countries. Another prevention measure is hand washing with soap. Diarrhea can be easy to prevent. Campaigns to fight childhood diarrhea had some success during the 1970s and 80s. The authors of the report hope this new plan will help return the issue to worldwide importance. And that's the VOA Special English Development Report.
This is the VOA Special English Development Report. Americans bought an estimated 18.5 million bicycles last year. Some bikes never got much riding. Mostly they gather dust. But a project based in Washington is putting unwanted bikes from the United States to good use in developing countries. Keith Oberg is the director of Bikes for the World. He says everybody has an old bicycle, and it is usually not ridden. It sits there in the garage or basement or shed, going to waste. Stephen Popick recently had 2 bikes to donate. He brought in 2 mountain bikes that he and his wife rode for the past 10 years. He said they would not be worth trying to sell, but they could be useful to somebody else. Bikes for the World collects bicycles and delivers them at low cost to community programs in developing countries. It shipped more than 5,000 bikes during the first 8 months of this year. Last year, it shipped about 10,300. The bicycle recycling program is one of the largest in the United States. It is a sponsored project of the Washington Area Bicyclist Association. Bikes for the World began in 2005. Since then, it has shipped more than 40,000 bikes to communities in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, says Director Keith Oberg. He said they are working with partners in 7 countries. They have sent bikes to Namibia and the Gambia. In Central America, they sent bikes to Panama, Costa Rica, Honduras, and Guatemala. And they are talking to 2 organizations in El Salvador. Bikes for the World partners with nonprofit groups in the United States to collect unwanted bikes. Then it works with nonprofits in the other countries to get the bikes to organizations and individuals that need them the most. For example, the Bicycle Empowerment Network, Namibia, uses the bikes to provide transportation for health workers. That makes it possible for them to visit more patients each day. The organization also has bicycle ambulance services to transport the sick. The Bicycle Empowerment Network also provides training and support to help local organizations and individuals open bike shops of their own. The businesses sell the recycled bikes at low cost and provide repair services. Many of the organizations use the money they earn to help pay for other community projects. And that's the VOA Special English Development Report.
This is the VOA Special English Development Report. Each year, millions of babies are born too soon and too small. Premature or preterm births are defined as births that take place earlier than 37 weeks of pregnancy. Prematurity is the leading cause of death in newborn babies. More than 1/4 of the 4 million newborns who die each year around the world were born too early. Preterm babies that survive can suffer a lifetime of serious health conditions. The examples include cerebral palsy, blindness, hearing problems, and learning disabilities. families and communities face emotional, physical, and financial costs. Christopher Howson is the Vice President for Global Programs at the March of Dimes, a nonprofit group. His group and the World Health Organization recently published a report called The Global and Regional Toll of Preterm Birth. He said the crisis of preterm birth is under-recognized, undercounted, undervalued, and underfunded. This report shows that 13 million babies are born every year preterm, and that over 1 million of those babies die as a result of being born too early. And these are just estimates. The true numbers could be even higher. More than 85% of preterm births happen in Africa and Asia. Africa has the highest rate, with about 4 million cases each year. Chris Howson says many of the causes of preterm births are related to poverty and weak healthcare systems. He says these include the poor overall health and nutrition of women, infectious diseases, lack of family planning, and the lack of good prenatal care programs that might identify problems early on in pregnancy. Preterm births are a problem not just in the developing world. The combined rate in the United States and Canada is the second highest in the world. Preterm birth rates in the United States have increased 36% in the last 25 years. There are two reasons for this: an increase in pregnancies among women over age 35 and an increase in the use of fertility treatments that can produce multiple births. One of the United Nations Millennium Development Goals for 2015 is to reduce death rates in young children by 2/3. Chris Howson says premature births must be reduced if that goal is to be met. What is being done about this issue? That will be our subject next week. And that's the VOA Special English Development Report.
This is the VOA Special English Development Report. The United Nations held a World Summit on Food Security in November. But the 3-day meeting in Rome produced only limited measures to fight rising hunger. The UN World Food Programme says more than 1 billion people, 1 in 6 worldwide, do not get enough food to be healthy. The troubled world economy is not the only cause of recent increases. The poorest countries continue to face high food prices, which have fallen elsewhere. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization says more than 30 nations continue to need emergency food assistance. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said, "The food crisis has forced millions of families into poverty and hunger." He said 6 million children die of hunger every year. And he warned that food security is closely connected to the issue of climate change. He said, at a time when the global population is growing, our global climate is changing. By 2050, we will need to grow 70% more food. Yet weather is becoming more extreme and unpredictable. The delegates in Rome promised to continue efforts to reduce by half the number of hungry people by 2015. But critics pointed out that world leaders made a similar promise more than 10 years ago. Several countries promised to increase aid for agriculture to help developing nations become more independent. Still, critics deplored a lack of greater action. Leaders from more than 60 countries were in Rome, but Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi was the only leader from a major industrial nation in the group of 8. An official from Kenya said it showed a lack of unity in the fight against hunger. The Food and Agriculture Organization says more than $40 billion a year needs to be invested in agriculture to defeat world hunger. The growing problem has affected developing countries, but also industrialized nations. The government estimates that 49 million people in the United States were food insecure in 2008. That means their households, at some time during the year, had difficulty providing enough food for all members because of a lack of resources. Almost 15% of all households were in that situation. And the Agriculture Department says the numbers may be even higher in 2009. And that's the VOA Special English Development Report.
This is the VOA Special English Development Report. We talked last week about a new report on preterm births, the leading cause of death in newborn babies worldwide. Each year, an estimated 13 million babies are born too soon. More than 1 million of them die as a result of their prematurity. Yet experts say many early births can be prevented. The report came from the March of Dimes and the World Health Organization. Christopher Howson is the Vice President for Global Programs at the March of Dimes, a nonprofit group. He says there are a number of simple, low-cost interventions that can improve the chances of a full-term birth. Mr. Howson said, "We should treat malnutrition in women both before and during pregnancy. We should treat infections that increase risk. We should monitor pregnancies carefully for signs of trouble. And should that baby be born preterm, we should care for that baby by providing a package of interventions that have been shown to be tried and true and very effective. For example, there are programs in Africa that teach the skin-to-skin method, also known as kangaroo care. Mothers learn to carry preterm babies in front instead of the traditional African way of carrying a baby on the mother's back. Skin-to-skin helps keep a preterm baby warm and makes it easier for the baby to breastfeed. Most preterm births take place in Africa and Asia, but rates in the United States have increased by more than 1/3 in the last 25 years. Alan Fleischman is the medical director of the March of Dimes. He was among a group of medical experts who met in Washington, D.C. in October. The group met to develop a plan for dealing with the problem in the United States. Dr. Fleischman says there is concern, especially about rising numbers of what are known as late preterm births. Those are the babies who are born between 34 and 37 weeks of pregnancy. They are responsible for 72% of all premature births in America. The rise of these births may be linked to increased use of drugs to start or speed up labor and more births by cesarean section. Dr. Fleischman says the group strongly advises against these interventions before 39 weeks, unless medically necessary. The experts also say doctors need to work with pregnant women to do a better job of estimating exactly when a pregnancy began. And that's the VOA Special English Development Report.
This is the VOA Special English Development Report. Before refrigerators were invented, the next best thing was an icebox. But another way to keep food fresh is to use an evaporative cooler. A common design is a tall box with several shelves inside to hold the food. The shelves are pieces of metal with many small holes through them. The sides of the box are covered with pieces of thick cloth. Containers of water are placed at the top and bottom of the cooler. The ends of each piece of cloth lie in the water so the cloth stays wet. The cooler is put outdoors, but not in the sun. Air will pass through the wet cloth. The inside of the box will stay several degrees cooler than the outside air temperature. This may be cool enough to keep foods fresh, at least for a short time. Some foods can make you sick if they are stored in conditions that are not cold enough to prevent the growth of harmful organisms. Freezing can keep some foods in good condition for months after the growing season. Yet foods can be damaged if they are kept too cold. The British development group Practical Action says the best way to prepare foods for storage is at harvest time while still in the field. Use a sharp knife and place the harvested items on a clean surface or directly into storage containers. Do not put them on the ground. Use clean water to remove dirt and keep the water clean. Usually it is better not to remove outer leaves from fruits and vegetables before storage. Without the leaves, food can become dry. Fruits and vegetables must be cool from field heat before they are put into storage. But cooling them in water can spread fungus throughout the food. A better idea is to harvest foods either early or late in the day, then leave them to cool naturally. Some fruits and vegetables must be stored at 0 to 4 degrees Celsius. Any colder and they might be damaged. Some foods need to be stored at 4 to 8 degrees, and some need to be stored above 8 degrees for best results. Wet the fruits and vegetables so they do not become too dry. The best time to do this is before storage. Cover the items in plastic once they reach the right critical temperature for storage. Most fruits and vegetables need the relative humidity in storage to be kept between 85 and 95%. Finally, leave space between the food containers and the walls of the cold storage area so air can flow. Keep the space clean and try not to open the doors too often. And that's the VOA Special English Development Report.